And welcome, everybody, into another installment of JC and Morgan, one of your favorite college football podcasts, maybe your favorite. We're just hoping to be in your top three when it's all said and done. Modest goals here on the show. This is episode 173 or 4. We'll have to confirm that. We'll have to check the logs. Check the tower logs. It's never a bad time to do Nicholson and a little Colonel Jessup is never a bad time for that. You, Lieutenant Weinberg. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Hope we're all set to go on another hour to hour and 15 minutes. Michael Haney is being very strict with us on time. We keep going over, JC. We need to keep this tighter. We need to keep this smoother, faster.
And we'll only have minimal interruptions for the Aaron Judge home run chase.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Nicely done. Yeah. We will not break in. And Sean McDonough will be happy to know that we're not going to break in the middle of this podcast for an Aaron Judge at bat. That voice you hear is Michael Haney, our fearless producer back in the Music City. JC Shurburtt of 24/7 Sports in the Windy City, and Mike Morgan. I'm actually in Studio B here in Kentucky, fresh off a trip to Indianapolis to call Colts Chiefs yesterday. Just to show you that upsets are not just in college football. How the Colts defeated the Kansas City Chiefs and held them to 17 points. That's life in the NFL, kid, as they say. My first trip to Indy, by the way, very cool, and actually went to. I know we talk college football almost exclusively here, but we do get into a little college hoops from time to time. On my bucket list, St. Elmo's, one of the best meals I've had in a long time. I called the game at, beautiful football stadium that Lucas Oil Stadium, certainly recommend. And then the other two things, you go by the Indy 500, which I've still never been to an IndyCar race. It seats, if you include the infield, over 300,000 people. Very impressive. And then for those of us who are diehard Hoosiers fans, yes, Hinkle Fieldhouse, where they filmed the movie Hoosiers, where they had the state championships for years and years and years in the state of Indiana. Very, very cool. Got to grab a basketball, hit some shots, and play on that infamous floor, which, by the way, I'm told is the same floor from way back when. They've obviously, resurfaced it and do whatever they've had to do, but it's the same actual wood that Jimmy Chitwood and the gang played on in the movie and played on in the 1950s and so on and so forth. So that, after calling a Coastal Carolina football game on a Thursday night, that was my weekend, and hopefully everybody out there enjoyed yours. We've got a lot to talk about. You've got another Power 5 coach fired. This is becoming a trend now. Like, this is college football has morphed into the NFL. NFL has morphed into college football when it comes to style of play and everything else we talk about. But now firing coaches in the middle of the season, which has been a long-standing tradition in the NFL, is now very much alive and well in college, as Jeff Collins, which we kind of started getting word, JC, toward the end of the show last week. I know you hit on some sources you trust that were reporting it. It took a couple of days extra for it to be official, but it is official. He gone. And that wasn't enough. They also canned the athletic director. In fact, they're on their third AD. So when I first got to Atlanta in 2010, Dan Radakovich was the athletic director. Did an excellent job there, and I've gotten to know Dan over the years, have a lot of respect for him. That a couple of years later, he left for Clemson, and of course now he's at Miami. I forget the name of the AD that became that was right behind him, but then he left, and then they just hired this guy, Stansberry, and now he's gone. So they're hiring in short order an AD, I believe, this week, and then who knows how long the head coach will take. So we'll talk about that. There were some more upsets. There were some great stories this week in college football. Kansas 4-0, I think, is a terrific story. The SEC had a couple of landmark games. As we continue to clear the dust, we'll do our SEC spotlight. We'll go under the radar. We'll do our Don't Sleep On segment, and of course we'll do our Hot Haney 5. So a lot, and our picks, which I had a winning week. That's nice. But Overall, the picks have not been very good, and Michael picks 5 extremely difficult games that we don't know are coming, and I think he enjoys us suffering each and every week before a national audience. Guys, with that being said, how is everybody?
I'm doing well. Had I guess we picked these games against the spread we recorded Monday last week. I think it got released on Tuesday. So the lines changed, and all of a sudden, bright, sunshiny day on Saturday. I go 6 for 6 on a parlay on my little app because it's legal in Illinois. You just get on the Barstool Sports app or Caesars. Caesars is affiliated with CBS, so I should probably say go to Caesars. But man, $10 and you win 550, you feel indestructible. And then I went right back to my losing ways the rest of the day. Really enjoyed you talked about pro football, Mike, and it's obvious that I'm a college football guy over pro. Grew up in South Carolina, pulled for the Falcons, never really got into the Panthers because I was a Falcons guy. I've lost interest in the Falcons over the years, along with the Atlanta Hawks. I still love the Braves, but that's about it. I didn't get into it. I play fantasy football a little bit, but in Illinois, one of the most interesting things is the Chicago Bear watch party. It is as intense and rowdy and nuts as any college watch party I've ever been to. It is a collegiate atmosphere. And so the better half, the kids went back to their dads this Sunday. She's like, I want to go watch the Bears. And so sure enough, we went, and we had fun, had some Polish sausage and some Italian beef, and it was rowdy. And the Bears, of course, won a close one against the Houston Texans. But just the negativity and positivity and the emotion that goes up and down with those watch parties for an NFL game. I'm just not used to that kind. I mean, usually in South Carolina or even in Atlanta, Mike, you go to a Buffalo Wild Wings on a Sunday, everybody's got different jerseys on. They're all kind of pulling for their fantasy team.
Yeah.
Nobody gets crazy. It gets crazy. I mean, it gets nuts when they play the Packers. It's like it's like Georgia and Florida, when they play the Packers. It's unbelievable.
That is what I love about Atlanta, is that you go to a typical sports bar on a Saturday, and there are fan bases from a dozen different teams. Because it's not just Georgia, it's all the SEC teams, it's some of the ACC, and then a few randoms, and then at the bottom of the list, and maybe this will kind of segue into the first chapter of the Haney Hot Five. Georgia Tech, it's like it doesn't even exist in this town. They're there, but they're not there, and I remember when I first moved to Atlanta, again, 12 years ago, I was under the impression that Georgia Tech was going to be a major talking point. And that back then they were enjoying some success under Paul Johnson, and I was doing some sports talk radio. And if you tried to bring up Georgia Tech, it was just crickets, man. Absolute crickets. So Jeff Collins, who came from Temple, got the job. Nobody thought it was a terrible hire. I don't know if anybody thought it was a home run hire, but Georgia Tech doesn't make home run hires because it's a very difficult job. So we'll get into that. And Michael Haney, it's a good time to bring you in and dust off another hot Haney Five. I know you've been living the life of a musician and being in trailers with groupies and roadies and all kinds of stuff, but you're sober now, and you look like you're very lucid and ready to produce another award-winning podcast.
Yeah, it's amazing what a good 10 hours of sleep can get you after 2.5 days on the road. Yeah. It's good. And being able to watch college football on like a Monday and a little bit on a Tuesday, that's kind of a gift, as much as I would love to see it as it was happening and feel all the raw emotions of what's going to happen in the unpredictable nature. Being able to watch a little bit of it later on and seeing some of it after it's happened isn't a bad thing to sort of see it for the first time, even though I know what's going to be happening. But we'll start off the Hot Haney Five here, gentlemen. And as we said towards the end of last week, JC, you were getting inside word at the time that Jeff Collins was going to be the next guy. They decided to wait until after the game this past week, but not just Jeff Collins, but Mike, as you said at the outset, the AD Todd Stansberry going away. Mike, I know that you have a lot of thoughts about this and being in Atlanta, but I do want to start with JC on this one simply because from a recruiting perspective, Jeff Collins, and again, it was so bad for him, as we mentioned last week with the betting odds of the next coach to get fired. They didn't even bother to spell his name correctly. So you know that you're not necessarily doing a great job if your name is spelled wrong, even though, he does spell Jeff at least in a way that's not as traditionally well known. But either way, JC, Georgia Tech has recruited and had been recruited for a particular style for a long time. And Jeff Collins was brought in, had a reputation as a recruiter. As Mike said, it done well enough in 2 seasons at Temple, but comes into a recruiting hotbed with a recruiting pedigree and expected to be able to turn some things around. But he just didn't. In your estimation, from that recruiting perspective, where did things go wrong for Jeff Collins in Atlanta?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, he's a defensive guy with a recruiting background. Had a lot of talent. He inherited at Florida when he was there, right? And I think that was the leftover Muschamp guys because he coached there under McElwain. Got the Temple job like a lot of guys do. Al Golden, Matt Rule coached there. Jeff Collins coaches there, does pretty well. And then hightailed it back to Georgia Tech, which is, his hometown, right? I've always kind of been skeptical of his long-term prospects, just to be honest. And I probably mentioned that when they hired him. That said, you probably get caught up if you're the athletic director in like the idea for branding and marketing and, the 404 and all that good stuff that they really tried hard to do. I mean, it was a noble effort because, athletic directors sometimes, you're sitting there thinking about, you kind of put the cart before the horse and you're like selling tickets and we'll drum up enthusiasm and sell some tickets and blah, blah, blah. Then maybe it won't take 5 years. Well, it was going to take 5 years regardless. I think what killed Jeff Collins is, it's different recruiting to Tech now than it used to be when, you could occasionally go and beat an SEC school on an in-state kid. Heck, Chan Gailey beat Georgia on Jonathan Dwyer, Jamar Nesbitt, Morgan Burnett. That was part of Paul Johnson's best team. But you got to kind of know what you're doing. And then, this new era of college football kind of gets dropped on us. And the transfer portal happens. And he got just annihilated in the transfer portal. I mean, it was a great piece of recruiting to get Jahmyr Gibbs to come. And the first thing you know, he's out the door to Alabama, and a lot of other guys left too. I also think, like a lot of defensive guys, he never could get his offense correct. I don't know what the hell they were trying to do. It seemed like some kind of pro style ish with a dual threat quarterback. But maybe that wasn't the right choice, and then he changed coordinators this year. I think Georgia Tech does need to be a special preparation. I don't think you sell out to the triple option. That's for a program, in my opinion, like maybe a Vanderbilt if you want to try it, or a Wake Forest if you want to try it. Wake's doing fine right now, so is Duke. But a place where you just kind of go, there's no history, there's no tradition. We've been getting our butt cut every weekend. Wouldn't it be fun to be in the game for occasionally? And so we'll run triple option. That was not where Georgia Tech was. Paul Johnson took over a 7-5 football team with a lot of good young players. And he just wasn't a guy that was going to go recruit. He wasn't particularly a great evaluator, except for when it was in his system. They hung in the balance. They were competitive enough to where he held on. He was right to criticize their administration as far as putting the money into it, because I don't think they spend a lot of money. And now, lo and behold, you got to pay 2 big buyouts and try to go get somebody else. So I think a lot of things did Jeff Collins in. I would have fired him last year, and not because of anything he necessarily did, but, the offseason did not go well. I mean, you talk about, a drone shot of Bobby Dodd Stadium, and Mike's lived in Atlanta and knows all about Tech. when Auburn comes in there, or Georgia comes in there, or Clemson comes in there, the random times they have Tennessee or whoever come play, they're going to get 40 to 50% of that crowd. But you still have Tech fans in there for half of it. Man, that sky shot of Grant Field was a sea of red and black. That alone should have told you, like, look, this is not going well because people just don't care. And we all know Tech had no chance to win that game, but it's the principle of the thing. And then he lost Gibbs. So I'd have probably fired him last year. They gave him one more year. Obviously, when things didn't get off to a great start this season, the ice was thin, so to speak. And I just think at the end of the day, you had what was kind of an iffy hire, which means, you kind of go, if he can recruit and if he gets the scheme right, and if he does this, he can rebuild this thing. He just needs time. And then they were just so bad that you could not give him any more time. There was no progress, and then, like I said, the portal hurt him. I think his staff hurt him. They have some good assistants on that staff, like Brent Key, who's the interim coach, but Trishard Choice, for example, left and headed west. I think he went to Texas, and then I think he was going to go to Southern Cal. I don't know if he ended up at Southern Cal or not, but that's Mr. Georgia Tech, and you got him walking out the door. I mean, there were just some bad signs. They need a complete reset and a plan to get them competitive in the short term and long term, how to build this thing back, because Mike's right. It's a program that's been good. George O'Leary had some fantastic teams. They've won ACC championships, including one with Paul Johnson. They won a national championship in 1990. They were a powerhouse in the 60s, so powerful that they left the SEC to go be the Notre Dame of the South, which in hindsight was a gigantic mistake. So it's Tech has been good. They have a hellacious little fan base there in Atlanta. The problem is a lot of their graduates leave. I mean, they played a bowl game in Seattle, 15 years ago. There are 10,000 Tech fans there because there's that many alums in Seattle, because it's they don't have a wide variety of majors. It's all engineering, your things like that. So, I think it's unfortunate. I hate to see that program where it's at. I think while it is irrelevant, they could do better. They have done better. And it's going to take, now that they've gotten rid of their AD, I mean, you got to get somebody in there with some vision and a plan and the wherewithal to not just fix football, but fix athletics. Georgia Tech's going to get left behind. You'd hate to see them become a Vanderbilt because they've survived this long not being. But that's definitely where they're heading.
Yeah, and they've got some things going for them that, quite frankly, Vanderbilt does not. 2016, they had a winning record. This is the Justin Thomas year. They beat Georgia. They beat a Kirby Smart Georgia team, and things looked rather good. They beat Kentucky in the Tax Slayer Bowl. They were 9-4. But that just seems like forever ago. I know it's 6 years ago. It seems like forever ago. Paul Johnson, and by the way, the 09 ACC crown was later stripped. So at that point, you got to, if you're like a Georgia Tech fan, you're like, really? We're the ones cheating? We're the ones that actually take academics seriously and make kids go to class and make them take engineering classes and math classes that no other schools want to make the student athletes take, and you're going to take our conference championship away. But they did in 09, and that kind of spelled the end of Paul Johnson, who had the personality of a housefly, and eventually that offense, which was always stale, but it was effective for a time, it fizzled out. People adjusted. They knew what to expect, and it went nowhere. And then nobody wants to play in that offense in this decade. And so you're not recruiting kids to that offense anymore. So Paul's time had come and gone. And then everybody, I can tell you, Georgia Tech fans were relieved he was gone. And they were so excited about just seeing an offense that was worth 3.5 hours melting away in the Atlanta sun of their time. And they got Jeff Collins. And Jeff Collins had been there twice as an assistant. So he had ties to Atlanta. And, again, I can't sit here and tell you that Jeff Collins' hire was terrible. that part of the thing is that Georgia Tech is not a program that can just go out and spend $7 million on a hot name football coach. That's just not where they are. And I'm telling you right now, the academics, I know people roll their eyes when they hear academics associated with college football anymore. It is a real deal issue for that program. I did a whole show on this one day back on the old 790 The Zone in Atlanta, and I had graduate after graduate after graduate call. It was the most engaging thing I've ever done with Georgia Tech fans. I was starting to wonder if they existed in Atlanta because, like you said, JC, most of them do move. It's a terrific academic school. They get great engineering jobs, and they go all over the country and all over the world. But they all said the same thing, like, because they went to class with these kids. Like, you're asking kids that so many other colleges can take their random cakewalk major and take all the liberal arts classes and learn virtually nothing, but say that they got a degree. You can't do that at Georgia Tech. Like, you actually have to use some of your acumen. You actually have to do advanced math if you're going to get through at Georgia Tech. Forget about graduating just to stay eligible. And that is a roadblock to get a lot of kids. And so no matter who you hire, that's not going away. And I know we'll talk about Deion. Deion and anybody else who gets that job, the first thing you have to do and ask the athletic director, whoever it's going to be, again, it'll be the third one in the past decade. What do we have any leeway on this? Remember, when Lou Holtz got the Notre Dame job, one of the first things he did was, I don't know if he demanded it, but he certainly begged and pleaded and got it. He got, back then we called him Prop 48. So Tony Rice would not have been eligible in the old Notre Dame. Tony Rice never would have happened, never would have been on campus. Lou basically got the power structure of Notre Dame to make an exception to their own rule, to let him come in, to let him adjust to campus life, and then eventually let him be eligible to play. And they won a national championship with him. That's what Notre Dame did. That's what Georgia Tech has not done. And if they don't do it, I really wonder, A, what kind of coach are you going to get? And B, how successful can you be? You know, Georgia Tech has lost its place in the ACC in a lot of ways. They can't say it, you can't get it back, but it's going to take some serious change in my mind. I don't think this is all on bad coaching hires. I do think there is something with the infrastructure right now that is preventing Georgia Tech from being more of a competitive program that, again, as JC pointed out, it wasn't that long they won a share of a national title. It wasn't that long they won an ACC title long ago. But clearly they're at a different stage right now, to the point where you just don't even think about them competing in that conference.
Well, moving along into question number 2, and Mike, as you said, you knew we would talk about this particular person, and maybe we're just spitting into the wind with this because Georgia Tech is in a place where they might not be investing in football, and some of these names are not going to go to a place if there's not going to be an investment in the future of what they're going to do. But there are names like Jeff Monken at Army, Jamie Chadwell that Bruce Feldman has put into his potential list. There, Bill O'Brien, the offensive coordinator at Alabama now. Obviously, we know his history starting with Penn State and then going to the Texans. Todd Monken at Georgia, who has been doing a great job there, helped them win the national title. But the name at the top of the list for Bruce Feldman, and one that has stuck out, and I honestly did a triple take at first, just because we're all of a certain age. We know exactly the history and the story of Deion Sanders and what an incredible athlete that he was, playing 2 sports the way that he did, and just an all-timer in that regard and what he was able to do. So when he took the head coaching job, or was promoting himself as a head coach, I'm not going to lie, I shrugged my shoulders. I kind of scoffed a little bit, but he's been at Jackson State for 2 years. He's recruited well. He's 15-2 overall at Jackson State right now. Is it time to actually start taking Deion Sanders more seriously in the discussion to be a future Power 5 head coach, whether it's at Georgia Tech, where he has ties in Atlanta, or somewhere else, possibly close by?
Well, I'll say this, and I'm almost surprised my own answer. So I've thought about this. I'm going to say if I'm Georgia Tech, I seriously consider it, because I think that you need a boost of adrenaline. You need a shock to the system in Atlanta. You need outside the box. And Deion fits all three of those. Deion has always been his own best self-promoter. And he has gotten attention in a SWAC school that nobody else could have had they gotten that job. I would, this is the one situation. If I'm Arizona State, I'm not looking for Deion Sanders. If I'm Nebraska, I'm not looking for Deion Sanders. And if and when the Auburn job comes open, I'm not looking for Deion Sanders. But if I'm Georgia Tech, I need to try something different. I would try it. Now, do I think he's going to be uber successful if it happens that way? No. And he's going to, again, unless Georgia Tech changes things, going to have to recruit a different kind of athlete, just as every other coach has had to do that during their time in Atlanta. But I'd give it a shot. Look, the media wants this to happen for a number of reasons, and not the least of which, it's like an entertaining sociological experiment to take the guy with very little experience and just throw him out there in a Power 5 job. And boy, we don't know if he's going to sink or swim, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I kind of fall into that category as well. I think it'd be a lot of fun to watch. I have no idea how it would turn out, but I think it would be incredibly entertaining, which is something that two words that have not been used to describe Georgia Tech football in quite some time. So knowing Deion, he's going to do his research and he's going to realize, man, that's a tough job. They might offer it to Deion and he might just flat out turn it down. Because again, Deion doesn't need to operate the way most coaches do, which is trying to provide a living to support their family. Deion's already got plenty of money. So Georgia Tech's going to offer more than Jackson State ever could, sure. But Deion could sit there and go, nah, I'm good where I am, and I'll wait till a job that I think is offers me more of a chance of winning comes along. And so that wouldn't surprise me either. But Deion in Atlanta, yeah, I mean, I can't help it. I'm intrigued by that, and I even though I don't think it's going to happen, I sure as heck would find it awfully entertaining if it did.
Well, I mean, here's a guy that hit a home run. Didn't he hit a home run for the Braves and return a kickoff for a touchdown for the Falcons the same day? One time.
Yes.
So yeah, Atlanta knows who Deion Sanders is. Coach Prime. I've seen this guy coach, Mike, at the Under Armour All-American game, where he was, I think, an assistant to one Herm Edwards. But he gets after it. He's passionate about coaching the kids. He's enthusiastic about coaching them. Just looking at like his public comments, you can tell he cares about his players. All those things. Sometimes when you have a celebrity coaching, you worry about. Like I think Peyton Manning would probably be one of the best college coaches in the history of the game if he wanted to be. But what does he need to do that for? He's a celebrity. So you got to kind of have the right mindset to do it. And I think he does. Now, my question would be, what's Georgia Tech going to do to help Deion Sanders? You can't just rebuild this thing with his name alone. Sure, he can help with fundraising, he can help with recruiting, he can encourage people to give. That's all great and well and good. But what kind of staff are you going to let him hire? Are you going to give him the resources, not just on the field, but off the field, to compete with the schools in their neighborhood, which are tough? I don't think you have to be as good as those schools off the field. I think you got to be close, though, and competitive. And so those are all my questions. Our Georgia Tech insider said today that it probably wasn't going to be Deion. They're probably going to go in another direction. But I think that's one direction you could go. I do think if you're Georgia Tech, you didn't hire Deion Sanders last time, but you hired a guy that you thought was going to come in and get everybody excited and recruit, and it kind of splattered up against the wall like a pie. So do you go that direction again, or do you go like with Jamie Chadwell from Coastal, who's always done more with less, who's won at Charleston Southern, North Greenville, Pikeville, wherever you name it, and who runs a dynamic offense that you can actually recruit players to there. in the ACC, when in a world where Wake Forest and Duke are doing fine, I don't think you got to finish in the top 10 in recruiting to win that league, man, or to at least compete for that league. So, would that be a better choice? Would a Bill O'Brien, who has a 2-year track record of rescuing a program from the ash heap, who was at Georgia Tech for 8 years as an assistant, would that be the direction? There's some intriguing options. And I think with Deion, the whole question, I think he could do it, and I think he could be successful. But any guy like that, that's kind of like a figurehead and a recruiter, they have to have the investment behind them for other personnel. Because it's just such a massive undertaking, and guys like that, their time is completely sucked because everybody wants a piece of Deion, right? They want to talk to Coach Prime. Well, then who's working on the football? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? Because there's a lot to be done. So Georgia Tech, I think if they went that direction, they would have to really pony up to make sure he's set up for success.
I'll say one more thing on this. I did ask a friend of mine who's an assistant for an ACC school, and I said, "What do you think?" And he kind of chuckled and he said, "I hope he gets it." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, because I can't wait to watch him fall on his ass." Coaches that have really paid their dues and spent a lifetime in this profession, they certainly know about these type of stories, and they don't always look at them favorably. Most of those, they'll never admit this publicly, and they'll never say it in front of a microphone. But they believe that a guy like Deion Sanders, once you get him out of the SWAC and you get him in a Power 5 type situation, where when you do lose a game, like you now have national scrutiny on you, and you have major boosters, and you have all this, and they want answers to questions that you may not have an answer to as to why this, that, or the other didn't work out. Like they want to see that experiment fail for obvious reasons. They don't particularly think fondly of that. And they don't particularly think that is a great idea moving forward. So there's a lot of people watching on this. And like I said, there's a lot of people in the media that are just hoping, and they will sell you on Deion because that's what they want. If we've learned nothing else about much of the national media that covers college football, they don't mind injecting their personal feelings and politics into kind of a lightly veiled objective mindset on what they think is good and bad for college football. So this is a story that's going to attract a ton. And I guarantee, and knowing some of the people that follow Atlanta sports and write for the AJC, if they don't offer him the job, there'll be somebody that rips him for not offering Deion Sanders the job. And Georgia Tech's well aware of that. But I don't think it's going to happen, but I would love to see it happen. I would love to see Deion at Georgia Tech going up against Florida State, for that matter. And the other thing about it is, if he did have success, he's not there for the long haul. He would be trying to parlay that into maybe taking over for Mike Norvell at Florida State or a bigger job. Like, I just can't see him settling in just because he used to play in Atlanta. He didn't grow up in Atlanta. He's a Florida kid. But one way or another, it'll be very interesting to see this whole process unfold. And I don't think we're done with coaches being fired in the middle of the season. There's already odds out there on who the next guy will be. Carl Durrell, the favorite, at 2-1. Brian Harsin of Auburn, 9-4. David Shaw, 3-1. I think we're, like I said at the top, this is now the new trend in college football. It's starting to mirror the NFL more and more. And in the NFL, when they decide they don't want you anymore, they don't wait till the end of the year. They just go ahead and cut ties in the middle of the season.
Going to be fascinating to see for sure. And guys, moving on to question number 3, a school and a program that has certainly been no stranger to upheaval and turnover is Tennessee. Living here in Nashville, much like how Atlanta is, you hear about the Vols all the time. You hear about the Dogs in Atlanta, you hear about the Vols in Nashville. Nobody really cares about Vanderbilt, right down the street, even though they're an SEC program. And you just don't. It's Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech, very similar in that regard in their respective cities, just a few hours away in terms of how they are represented in each city. But it's not that long ago that the sports radio was on fire with, running off Jeremy Pruitt and what happened there, and what happened under Butch Jones, and this Tennessee team that's seemingly been lost in the wilderness now for a long time. Would they ever be able to get it right again? Well, it seems like they have with Josh Heupel and getting a big win over Florida just to shake off some demons. Josh Heupel proclaimed Rocky Top is back. Everybody's feeling good about themselves and then the checkerboard orange and white there in Knoxville. But I want to bring it to the quarterback for them. And I know we've talked about Anthony Richardson of Florida here the last few weeks and in varying capacities, the hype train after week one, and then not necessarily being able to build it up. He had a fantastic game against the Volunteers, and but we're not going to spend time talking about him. I want to spend some time talking about Hendon Hooker and the fact that he was on list to start the season, but it just feels like, guys, through the first few weeks that he was just kind of quietly going about his business and nobody really talking about him. He doesn't lead the SEC in passing. That honor goes to Will Rogers right now, and Hooker is third in the league. But gentlemen, Hendon Hooker and Josh Heupel's offense, legitimate Heisman guy right now for you moving forward to see if this Tennessee team can keep it rolling as a top 10 team right now?
No question for me. If they keep winning, he's right up there. Look, I haven't talked about him much because I saw enough last year to be convinced that Hendon Hooker is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the league again. And that's what he's been. He operates that offense very well. They were fortunate to get him. I mean, remember, this is a guy that couldn't get the starting job at Virginia Tech. This is a guy that wasn't expected to get the starting job after he transferred to Tennessee. And in both cases, Hendon Hooker has just played the long game and won out and let his talent take over. He is what they hope Anthony Richardson will become. And I know Anthony Richardson had overall a good game, but he is not Hendon Hooker when it comes to throwing the football. And that's what separates Hendon Hooker from a guy like an Anthony Richardson. I mean, he's just natural. It's a son of a college quarterback and a guy who's can make all the throws and again shines in that offense. So yeah, I think, look, when I was talking about it could be a banner year for quarterback play in the SEC in depth, I wasn't just talking about the leading candidates, Bryce Young, Will Levis, KJ Jefferson. I was talking about Will Rogers. I was talking about Stetson Bennett. And yes, I was talking about Hendon Hooker. And I would put all of those guys ahead of Anthony Richardson still. We'll see what Spencer Rattler does when the Gamecocks hit a lot of swing games left on their schedule. Their season's kind of gone exactly how I thought it would so far. But Tennessee, to me, they still can't defend anybody. Like, I don't want to take away from Florida's offense entirely, but there was this great write-up, and I can't remember. I want to give them credit. This is from Ben Walsh of ESPN. College football's most imbalanced teams. So in there, you've got like the Iowa Hawkeye defense is number 6 in the country. Their offense is number 130, dead last, right? North Carolina, 125 defensively, 16th offensively. And then you have a school like Tennessee, and Tennessee on offense, they are number 1 in the country right now on offense, but they're 95th defensively. That's still a concern for me going forward. I think they're going to be involved in some games where, and this wound up being a quality game. It was closer than I thought it would be. But I think they're going to be wind up in some games where they give up a lot of points, and maybe Hendon Hooker in that offense finally has an off day. And that's when you see perhaps Tennessee get humbled a bit.
I'll say this about Hooker. Loved him out of high school, Greensboro, North Carolina. Really smooth passer. Just a guy that was accurate. That's why, people kind of wonder, why didn't Justin Fuente work out at Virginia Tech? Because he seemed like such a good fit and a quarterback guru and all that. Well, when you make the conscious decision to not go with a guy like Hooker who has talent, that can come back to bite you. That said, here's what's interesting. I don't know if Hooker's maybe a guy that doesn't practice that well. I mean, his numbers at Tech one season, he had 11 to 2 touchdown to interception ratio, protected the ball, thought he made plays in those games I watched. But remember, he didn't win the job. Joe Milton won the job last year.
Joe Milton. I was just
trying to. He was god awful.
Yeah, Joe Milton.
And, And look, there was some familiarity with Heupel and Milton because Milton's an Orlando kid and Heupel recruited and blah, blah, blah. But man, that offense was going to get them beat last year because it's 3-and-out city, right? 3-and-out, 3-and-out, 3-and-out. Hooker comes in, runs it masterfully, and they have a 7-6 year where they go up and down the field. They're going up and down the field this year too. They even had some injuries. Tillman was out Saturday, right?
Huge loss.
Yeah, their top receiver, was not playing. But guys like Ramel Keaton, who was a top recruit who's never played that well, laid out to get that ball. Jalen Hyatt from South Carolina played very well in that game. They their backs run hard, and that offense just, you literally, Mike, watching how fast they go, want to throw up if you're pretending to be a defensive player. It's just like, oh God. Could defense come back to bite them? Yeah. And I think Florida's right now, I would say they're average. I mean, Florida's a play away or a touchdown away from being 3-1, but they're also 2 plays away from being 0-4 with a loss to South Florida, who's not very good.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gators, I think they're a little bit average. Anthony Richardson obviously has a lot of talent, was on Saturday, but we'll see where the Tennessee defense takes them. I do think, they have to kind of shore up that side of the ball. I'll say this about their defense. I like the fact they force turnovers. They're a little bit opportunistic, like they did against Pitt. So it's not all bad. The stats don't tell the whole story, but moving forward against some of these teams they have to play, namely Alabama and Georgia coming up, you got to get a little better on that side of the ball.
All right, moving along to question number 4 here of the Hot Haney 5, and one of the more entertaining games of the weekend was Clemson at Wake Forest. Guys, we had that as part of our pick 5, and both of you were successful in picking that particular game, as the Tigers were 7.5-point favorites. Actually, I'm sorry, JC, you got that one wrong. We'll get more into that here in just a little bit.
Ouch.
7.5-point favorites were the Tigers on the road, and they came back and escaped in 2 overtimes against the Demon Deacons, who had Sam Hartman go 20 of 29, 337 yards, 6 touchdowns. And honestly, guys, with the way Clemson's been playing the last 5-6 years, we haven't seen an ACC opponent do that to a Clemson defense in a long time. There's one big reason: Brent Venables is no longer on the sidelines for the Tigers. So I ask both of you this, for a top 5 team who is still in contention to make the college football playoff here. Is this just a blip, just something that happened because Wake Forest is playing at home, early game, yada, yada? Clemson was missing some starters in the secondary, or do you think this could be the first crack in a sign that the Tigers are going to be missing Brent Venables a little bit more than people may have expected?
Well, I don't think anything Wake Forest offensively does, or does offensively, to be grammatically correct, is a fluke. I'm that big of a Sam Hartman guy. Have been for a while. Have done a couple of his games, and he is that important to that team. Now, what's the difference between this game and the other games in the past is that their offensive line would get completely blown up by Clemson, and Clemson would be their kryptonite. Like, it was the one defense in that league that they struggled against. They gave this time Sam Hartman enough time to make plays. Remember the name I mentioned, A.T. Perry, 6'5" out of Lake Worth, Florida. That's an NFL wide receiver that he's throwing to. So they've got 2 special players that combined for a lot of big plays in that game, and the offensive line stepped up. Now, some of that is Clemson might not be as dominating. Some of that might be, and I'm sure some of this is, you miss Brent Venables a bit. Like that was an elite, if not the best defensive coordinator in the country for a while. You don't just replace him, even if it's a guy in-house that kind of knows the secret sauce, so to speak. So much of being a great coordinator is not having a scheme. It's adjusting on the fly. And that's something you can't steal from your predecessor. You can't just get that through osmosis. A lot of that is a feel thing. And great coordinators have that. And Venables had that. So I don't know. I don't think that I don't think that Clemson is a great team right now. Game day is going to be there, and they're taking on NC State, and no doubt JC will be taking some pointers from his boy Dave Doran on strategy and motivation and all that good stuff. But I don't think there is a great team in the ACC. I just don't. In fact, I mean, I really don't think we have more than 3 great teams out there in college football. If you want to boil it down to the national landscape, it's Georgia, it's Bama, it's Ohio State. But I just don't see a dominating team in the Atlantic Coast Conference this year. That includes Clemson. But kudos to Wake. I mean, that was their best opportunity, and they had it, and they fought like hell. But they just came up a little bit short. But I do think overall, you cannot say enough about the job that Coach Clawson has done in Winston-Salem. I mean, if Wake Forest can win, like Dave Clawson's going to get a lot of guys fired. If Wake Forest can win, don't tell me Georgia Tech can't. I mean, because Wake Forest is one of the most difficult jobs in the country in a lot of respects. But he's done a remarkable job there.
Yeah, it really has. And picked up where Jim Grobe sort of left off. Jim Grobe had a good run there. So kudos to him. And yeah, if you're Wake, you're hurting about that loss a little bit. But with Clemson's defense, you don't just not miss Brent Venables because you can have all of his players and the scheme and the playbook and all that. What Brent was really good at and still is good at is you notice the play clock's running down. He's over there watching your defense, dissecting you, and then he's changing the call most of the time, Mike. I mean, it's like an audible in football. I mean, on offense with the quarterback. And it was a little bit of a gambling style, but they had the athletes to get home and get there and put pressure, and it would just tear teams up, especially Wake Forest, because Wake's running game is like predicated on this mesh point pause thing. And it's tough to stop because the guy pauses, kind of slight pause, and then patiently finds the hole and runs. And what Clemson would do is just like run over, and just blow it up before it even got started. I'll say this in defense of the Clemson defense. They did have injuries. Sheridan Jones was out. He's a corner. Andrew Makuba was a freshman All-American safety last year. He was out. Malcolm Green was a reserve DB. He was out. They did have their defensive line back with Brian Breesy and Tyler Davis coming back. But, like you said, Wake was able to give Hartman time. There wasn't the disruption and dominance up front that there has been in this series. And Wake lit them up. So going to be interesting to me to see what happens against NC State, especially with the weather situation. In South Carolina this weekend. I mean, it's supposed to be heavy rain. I think that probably plays in Clemson's favor. But NC State's built a lot differently on defense than Wake Forest. I don't see Clemson racking up 500 and something yards of total offense against NC State. They've got big, fast athletes on that D. They've got a good quarterback. They've settled down since losing to since almost losing to East Carolina. I mean, the Texas Tech win they had in Raleigh 2 weeks ago is extremely impressive now. I mean, you saw what the Red Raiders did to the mighty Longhorns this past weekend. So it's going to be an interesting game, I think. I just want to wait and see as far as the high end of this Clemson defense, what happens when they get their defensive backs back.
All right. Well, fair enough, and should be a fascinating game to watch. And maybe that one will be on our pick 5. We will see. I'll just drop a little hint there on that one. Final topic for you guys. Nothing encapsulated what college football can be more, the unpredictability of college football more than what we saw from Kansas State this past 2 weeks, where they throw up 10 points and lose to Tulane, and then turn around and put 41 points on the board and knock off Brent Venables, the aforementioned defensive coordinator of Clemson, moved on to Oklahoma and his number 6 team. So, guys, I just want to give a little bit of love and some thoughts to the state of Kansas right now, because, one, this doesn't happen often that Kansas and Kansas State are both good in spite of the loss to Tulane. The Wildcats came back, and what a redemption story for Adrian Martinez and transferring and being able to do some good things there with the Wildcats. Jalen Daniels with Kansas getting a nice win over Duke this weekend, of the 2 undefeated teams that no one expected to be undefeated at the time. But between the Jayhawks and the Wildcats, two programs right now, and also proving you never really know where the right hire is going to come from. Two coaches in Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold that were not big name hires. But guys, just your feelings right now on the Wildcats and the Jayhawks and what they're able to do. And if the path continues the way that it is, will be a pretty entertaining rivalry matchup towards the end of the year.
Well, I did a deep dive on Coach Leipold last week on his background, basically a D3 coach with a ton of success, and then Coach Kleiman, a North Dakota State guy, an FCS guy that basically made his name coaching at another classification. Now, you would never see like an SEC job go to one of those guys. You would never see one of the prominent kind of blue blood programs hire a guy like that. But thankfully, there are other jobs that would give those type of coaches an opportunity to prove that they could do it at a higher level. And that's what both of them have done thus far. Two great stories. I mean, the Kansas story right now is the best story going. I realize Kansas football does not move the needle, right? So there's only so much time people are going to spend on the subject as a whole. But a quality game against Duke. Both those programs ought to be proud of what they've been able to accomplish with their new coaches. And you just can't say enough about how awful Kansas was and what they're doing now, no matter what happens the rest of the way, is a great story. Kansas State is, I've always thought, having done games there, it is a kind of a hidden gem. There's a lot going for it there. Now, you do have to be creative in recruiting, and much of Snyder's success came from JUCOs. And now junior college guys with the transfer portal aren't as integral in building a program like that, but you do have to be creative in recruiting. But in terms of facilities and fan base, and you've got some tradition there, the Little Apple's pretty cool spot. So I'm not surprised that Kansas State would have some success. Kansas is one I thought could be doomed for another 20 years. Just how far they sank. I mean, Gino was the guy that had it going for a little bit. But other than that, what has Kansas football been the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah, it's been non-existent, but these guys that work their way up from D2, D3, man, you got to be able to coach football to win at those levels. I mean, you don't have necessarily a huge talent advantage if you're at North Dakota State, say. I mean, eventually you get there, but you got to coach. You certainly have to coach at the University of Buffalo, which, by the way, has become somewhat of a cradle of coaches for football and basketball both. I don't know why, but that's the case. And I thought K-State, after the second Bill Snyder situation, they went out and found the best coach, and he's done a really good job. You talk about Oklahoma, they're 4-2 in Norman against the Sooners since 2012. They beat them 4 times, and this guy's got 2 wins. That's tremendous. I want to give a shout out to Tulane and Willie Fritz for pulling that upset, because that was a game. Kansas State didn't turn it over in that game. Kansas State just got dominated by Tulane's front 7, which I never thought would ever happen, but it did. But you look at their other wins. They beat the snot out of Missouri. They've beaten Oklahoma, beat South Dakota in the first one. And then, Kansas is legit, folks. I mean, it's not like one of those things where they've started with, the Sisters of the Poor, and then, a team from the Big 12 that's maybe down, right? That would be your 4-0 start that, is maybe a little overrated. They beat Tennessee Tech. Okay, that's fine. Won at West Virginia. West Virginia got up off the mat and smacked Virginia Tech Thursday night. Houston, coached by Dana Holgerson, was a top 20 team in the preseason. They won by 18 on the road there, and then came back to beat a previously unbeaten Duke, 35-27. And I'd have to imagine, Mike, against Iowa State this weekend in Lawrence. Iowa State lost a lot of players off last year's team. Matt Campbell can coach, but I would think they'd be the favorite to go to 5-0 against the mighty Cyclones. So they've done it with wins over good teams. I mean, it's not like they've been beaten up on teams that aren't very good.
Matt Campbell is kind of one of those, I don't want to say cautionary tales, but he's living a good life. He's making a lot of money, and that money goes a long way in Ames, Iowa. But there was a time he could have almost any college job, and quite a few pro teams were knocking on the door. And it looked like, well, maybe Matt Campbell can keep it up. It's not like it's been a terrible fall from grace, but they're not quite what they were when Matt Campbell really had it going in Ames. And I'd love to know if there's any regrets that go on in his head. And, he's still going to be courted. And I just wonder how much longer does he hang around, because it's a good job, but it's also a very difficult job.
Well, if he loses to Kansas this week, then he'll be, hey, if you want to stay at Ames, well,
that'd be a tough week. That'd be a tough week. All right, is that it? That's
from the state of Kansas to Clemson's defensive woes, Hendon Hooker's Heisman chances, Deion Sanders possibly in Atlanta to fill the Georgia Tech now vacant role. Guys, that wraps it up for the Hot Haney 5.
All right. We'll do a quick SEC spotlight in a moment. I do want to do some under the radar. It won't be long on this one. It's just a couple quick ones. Number one is a stat. Tennessee is one of just 2 teams to score on every red zone opportunity this year, and that's with a minimum of like 20, 25 times. So, I mean, their offense isn't just fast. It doesn't just put up numbers. They score when you need to score the most. When you're in the red zone, that offense has been incredibly efficient as well. And another one which ties into a category. We don't have enough time to do a deep dive on this, but I couldn't help but think with the firing of the coach at Georgia Tech, and with the firing of Scott Frost at Nebraska, and with Virginia Tech struggling, and with the Florida programs struggling, although Florida State's having a bounce back year so far. Tennessee did struggle mightily for over a decade. Texas struggling in their own way. UCLA struggling. And I would also add Stanford. There was a time at Stanford going all the way back to, Bill Walsh and Dennis Green. And I mean, Harbaugh, like whoever was there, you'd win. You didn't play for national championships, but you won a lot of games and you were really relevant. Here's a number. Since 2019, Stanford head football coach David Shaw is 12-21. They lost this past weekend to Washington. It wasn't close. Washington, not that long ago, was going through their own doldrums under Coach Lake, but they clearly have turned it around. David Shaw, I think a lot of people would not know this. This would be an under-the-radar salary. David Shaw at Stanford doesn't make 2.5 or 3.4 or 5.1 or 6.2. He makes $9 million a year. $9 million a year to go 12-21. And in a Pac-10 that's not as good as it used to be, Stanford has just progressively gotten worse and lower on the totem pole in a lesser league. How much longer can that go on? I mean, I'm just amazed. I thought David Shaw was on his way, as I've said, JC, years ago on our podcast. I thought he would be one of those next in line for an NFL job. Now he might have an NFL job as like a wide receivers coach, but he ain't going to be a head coach. I mean, what happened? It's Stanford. Have you been to Palo Alto? It's a beautiful, beautiful place. They got a lot of money. I mean, that is a pretty good job.
I used to go every single May-ish to July-ish for the Stanford Nike camp. That was a favorite trip of mine. It was, shoot, man. One time I stayed in Cupertino. One time I stayed in San Francisco. I mean, the weather's great out there that time of year. It is a gorgeous campus. It's not like Cal. Cal's a little different.
Yeah.
Stanford is beautiful. Palo Alto is beautiful. And the academics are second to none. Mike, here's kind of how I see it. I think it's a lot like he's kind of almost like Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State, where your failure to adapt your offense and kind of get with the times. Kind of similar to what how Jimbo Fisher's struggling at A&M right now. A lot of these pro style offenses and things like that are like old school pro style offenses, not like the Chiefs and with what they're doing and all that. You've seen it before, and it's easy to scheme up, and defenses are still good and coaches are good. I mean, you don't necessarily have the advantages that you used to. And you look at his first 5 years at Stanford, 3 Rose Bowls, a Fiesta Bowl, and something called a Foster Farms Bowl, I think that's the one at Levi's Stadium.
Great milk from those folks.
Yeah. Since then, Sun Bowl, Alamo Bowl, Sun Bowl in 2018, nothing since. And I realized the COVID year they were 4-2 or whatever, but 4-8, 3-9, all this other stuff. So look, maybe he's got to catch up and modernize. Maybe he can't. Stanford's always been kind of a program that's been very oriented toward the NFL because Dennis Green and Bill Walsh and Jim Harbaugh all coached there. Tyrone Willingham was a pretty good coach there too.
Yes.
He
parlayed that into Notre Dame.
Yeah. Stanford's had a lot of guys go back and forth in the league. That's kind of been their shtick. So, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. My guess is they'll let it play out a little longer because they're Stanford, and they don't want to like can somebody 3 games into the season.
Well, but that's the thing. Like it's such a different, from being out there.
Yeah.
It's so different. Like David Shaw would have been gone a long time ago at an SEC school. He would have been gone at a Big 12 school and many ACC schools, certainly Big 10 schools. But out there, it just doesn't resonate. Like it goes on, and their mascot's a tree. Like what's the old expression? If a tree falls down in the forest and nobody hears, something like that. I'm going to screw that metaphor up, but anyway. One way or another, it's like if I was out there twice last year to California, and it's like the NFL has a hard enough time getting people to stay involved and immersed, but they are. But California is such a laid back state, and the college football fan there, it's nothing like what we're used to. You can't even describe the disconnect that exists. It's just so much different than what we are used to. And so it like you said, like they're not going to do it in the middle of the year. Even though that those odds I read, he was 3rd on that list. I wouldn't be surprised if they just wait, and they might not fire him at all. He might put together another substandard season. And it's like, well, he's a good guy, and he represents the Stanford brand well. So let's let him turn it around. I just don't know, but that's amazing. That one snuck up on me. Like I knew, and I had somebody who's out there who covers Pac-12. He said, Mike, he checked out 2 years ago. He said, I said 2 years ago he should have been fired, but it just like it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe there's a Stanford message board, JC. I'm sure they've got a site like everybody else where it's like, how much longer can we put up with this? But outside of that, they're just like, there's no real buzz or something in the air that's like, this is terrible. We're losing games we shouldn't lose. Our program's on the decline. It's like, no, it's all good. It's another beautiful day here in Palo Alto, and David Shaw's a nice guy, so let's just keep him around. Anyway,
he's 94-47. He's the winningest coach in Stanford history. Broke that record.
Been there the longest.
2017. Guess who held the record before? Pop Warner.
Okay. Because again,
freaking Pop Warner, man.
Freaking Pop Warner. Because it's such a springboard job.
Yeah.
Like Dennis Green, pro job. Willingham, Notre Dame, Harbaugh, pro job. Like you go to Stanford and you just put up some numbers and you have all these resources. It's terrific. And then you take a bigger job. And I think that was the plan for David Shaw. That's certainly the path I had envisioned. Not so much. One other quick one, one other under the radar. Rick Stockstill in Middle Tennessee. Congratulations. Yes. They sent back from Murfreesboro a couple of hundred Miami fans that, again, had never been to the campus, couldn't tell you where it is, sporting neck tattoos, finishing up trade school and getting ready for that next fight in the stands to impose their will on somebody half their size. Middle Tennessee defeating Miami is just, it's so like, it's such a bucket of ice cold water in the face of the U to remind you, nope, once again, you've been told you're on your way back, but you're not back. And you might have the right coach.
Second upset either. It was a thorough domination.
It was a domination. Yeah. It was I mean, how does that happen? Middle Tennessee is, I don't even think they're going to win their conference. Are they? Am I missing something? What's the projection on Middle Tennessee this year?
They were, that Stockstill is another one that people keep talking about. Just kind of run his course. Although I know Rick Stockstill, and I like him a lot. And I hope to God
he's been there forever.
Yeah,
and so is the AD, and they know each other from the ADs from South Carolina and Rick's from Clemson, and look, they've had some good moments in Murfreesboro, but man, if you're Miami and Van Dyke gets benched, we're talking about a guy who was in some quarters projected to be a first-round draft pick. You get benched against Middle Tennessee. Again, cold bucket of water, basically saying you're not back. You can't draw anybody to the stadium. Much like in California, it's weird because people in the state of Florida are rabid football fans, and they love college football. But you wouldn't know that if you went to a Miami home game. And granted, the stadium is far from their campus, but my goodness, it's just like you want to get some of those drone type views. It's a little bit depressing. So anyway, under the radar, Rick Stockstill in Middle Tennessee. Everybody's talking about how Miami lost. Give a little bit of love to the guys who pulled off the upset, the mighty Blue Raiders.
Yes, that was something else. A lot of long touchdown passes. Friend of mine I went to high school with, Coach Brian Lane from Clover High School in South Carolina. His son plays for Middle Tennessee, so exchanged texts with him. They got to go down for the game. Very, very, exciting time. Oh, get the biggest Blue Raider fan on the planet that I know, Chris Childers. You know him from Sirius XM Radio.
Oh, he's happy.
Loves the Blue Raiders, so he was fired up about that. And,
prominent graduate.
Yeah,
Chris, the show pony.
Oh yeah, loves it. So great, good job by them.
And I'll just mesh quickly into don't sleep on for this coming week. I know we're going to get into our picks. Don't sleep on the Chris Rodriguez impact for Kentucky against Ole Miss. That's a top 25 matchup. They're pumped up in Oxford. One of the more anticipated games there for a while. Kentucky just continues to do Kentucky things. They don't wow you. They don't wow you. They don't woe you. They don't dazzle you. They just win games. But I think a lot of people think that there's really not that much of a difference between Chris Rodriguez and, say, Cavassier Smoke, in part because people love saying Cavassier Smoke. Chris Rodriguez is a much different player and a much better running back than Cavassier Smoke or anybody else they've got in the backfield right now. That's a heck of a late addition after his suspension has run out now. You're getting a healthy, well-rested preseason first-team All-SEC tailback to help that offense, which is, again, a physical offense. They don't just throw it around all over the place, even with Will Levis. So don't sleep on the impact that Rodriguez has on that game.
I'm shocked he's back too by Ole Miss. That's completely shocking to me. Funny how these. I'm not criticizing Kentucky or the punishment, from what I gather, it was kind of some confusion. But after all the theatrics about, is he going to come back? He's not going to come back. Not going to come back. I looked at their schedule, Mike, and I was like, maybe by Florida, but definitely by Ole Miss. He'll be back.
Yep.
Sure enough, Ole Miss, he's back.
Sure enough, he's back in time for that ball game. And from all I can tell, that's probably the maximum that suspension should have been.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. What I heard was not that big of a deal. So
no, not in
more
today's
like
climate.
confusion than anything.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Michael, where are we going?
All right, you ready for the pick five?
No, but I never am. So let's just go ahead and do it.
All right. Well, let's wrap things up here with our pick five. Last week, you only differed on one game, that being the Wake Forest and Clemson game. JC, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you picked the Tigers there on the road to cover the 7.5, and it was a double overtime 6-point win for the Tigers there. But that's where you guys split. Mike, you started off hot. They're picking Duke and Wake. 2-0. Duke covering the spread there in Kansas for that one. Southern Cal, though, you both picked the Trojans. They only won by 3 on the road in Corvallis. Needed a late touchdown to survive that one, and Lincoln Riley's first scare as head coach for the Trojans. Then the Volunteers, as we talked about earlier in the Hot Haney 5, did not cover the 11-point spread in that particular game as the Gators made it close late. The old backdoor cover. Both missed that one, but you both were the beneficiary of I guess not necessarily a doink. Maybe they would call it an oink, as Arkansas missed.
That's not funny.
The field goal there. But you were both the beneficiary as Texas A&M was a 2.5-point favorite, and they only won by 2 there. So Arkansas was.
Can I just say something on the Arkansas game? We kind of blazed through SEC Spotlight, but there were 2 games that were just heartbreaking losses. The way Arkansas lost that game to A&M, it's not just the field goal that hits the top of the upright. There was a play where KJ Jefferson is right near the goal line and loses the football. And Texas A&M is like bodies huddled all around it near the sideline. And before you know it, one guy has it and he hands it off to another guy and he's streaking down the sideline 90 yards. I mean, you just change one of those plays. And all the talk this week is Sam Pittman, Arkansas, Jimbo Fisher, how terrible he's done, what a disappointment he's been, how great Arkansas. I mean, that's how quickly things can change on a dime in both situations. So my heart bled for Arkansas Nation because they were more than good enough to win that game. They really were.
They got to get back up off the mat quick, my friend.
I know. Things are about to get real, as the kids say. And then the other one is the Missouri-Auburn game. Again, Missouri had that game won. They have a field goal kicker who hasn't missed an extra point in his life, and he misses a chip shot that would have won the game. Then they have a player going toward the goal line. Now, this was not one of those knucklehead plays where a guy is just like showboating and he feels obligated to just drop the ball shy of the goal line for no rhyme or reason. And it's like one of the most bonehead plays in football. It drives all of us crazy. No, he was at least like trying to get to the pylon, but in that effort, the ball came loose and it wound up being a touchback. And so both those games could have easily flipped, but instead it's a heartbreaking loss for Arkansas and a heartbreaking loss for Missouri. For Arkansas, they'll be back. For Missouri, I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what Missouri is right now. But I know they had that game potentially won, and they were not able to finish it.
Auburn's got LSU this weekend. Missouri's got Georgia coming to town.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, that the sliding doors of both of those things. And you're right, Mike, the narrative of where things could go, especially juxtaposed with Miami losing to Middle Tennessee State. You know, supposedly A&M was getting right. They had a nice win over Miami, who was expected to be good. And then you get the thrilling hold-on win over Arkansas. But yeah, things are still a little bit different there for Jimbo Fisher in that regard, and how things would be perceived had they not been able to hold on and win that game. But let's move on to the pick five here. Again, the overall records for this season: Mike 6-9, nice, and JC 4-11. So let's see if we can get you guys right. So let's start. Let's start with
whose idea was it to let you pick the games on a pick segment? Nobody else puts themselves through this, but okay.
All right. Well, here we go, guys. Here we go. As you mentioned earlier in one of your stats, Mike, the disparity of one side of the ball carrying more than the others, the Iowa Hawkeyes are definitely one of those teams. So let's go to Iowa here with Michigan coming to town. The Wolverines 10.5-point favorites on the road against the Hawkeyes. The Wolverines have not won at Iowa since 2005. So there's a little nugget for you. But gentlemen, Wolverines 10.5-point road favorites to Iowa.
Here's what I do know about this game. It started in Vegas at Michigan -4. You know how much money has to be wagered to go from -4 to -10.5?
Mm-hmm.
It just goes to show you nobody believes Iowa can score on anybody, nonetheless Michigan, and you can put me in that camp as well. I'll take Michigan.
I'm going to take Michigan as well. Iowa did put 27 on the board against Rutgers last week, but they had 2 defensive touchdowns, worst offense. And look, I'm not trying to come down on the kid. I wonder if he's still the quarterback. The guy I saw starting the opener has no business playing D2 ball, much less for the Hawkeyes. And it's another situation. You got the OC there. It's Kirk Ferentz's kid. So what do you do?
What do you do? What do you do? All right. Well, that's going to be an intriguing matchup. Iowa, great defense and special teams. Sometimes that can be the difference in covering a 10.5-point spread. We'll see if you guys can get the win on that one. So moving on, another game that you mentioned in the SEC, I'll dub this the Are They Really Good Bowl. Kentucky, Ole Miss. Top matchup here in the SEC this week between those two teams. The Rebels at home, 6.5-point favorites. Who we got?
Kentucky.
I'm going Ole Miss. I think they got too much offense. I need to see, last week was the classic. I've been watching Kentucky for a lot of years, especially under Stoops. They have that one game against a lower level opponent where they don't look good. Like last year it was Chattanooga, and Chattanooga almost beat them. That means nothing. Don't get caught up in it. But I think Ole Miss and their style of play, they'll be able to throw it, run it, and they're at home. So I'm gonna go with Ole Miss. Don't think it'll be a blowout. I think it'll be like a 7 to 10 point win.
All right. I picked this one because I'm just intrigued to see what the response is like after a loss to Kansas State. Oklahoma goes on the road to TCU, and they are 6.5-point road favorites. Again, after that loss to Kansas State. So, gentlemen, Oklahoma, TCU, Sooners, 6.5-point road favorites. Who we got?
I don't know what happened to Oklahoma. Adrian Martinez, who has been playing college football, I believe, since the steam engine was invented, as it were. He had his breakout game for this century and was terrific. I'm not in love with Oklahoma's defense, but I do think Oklahoma's offense is impressive. I'll actually take Oklahoma to bounce back. They took the gut punch. This is where coaching comes in. This is when Coach V has to use some of that voodoo that he has to get them off the mat and get them remotivated and remind them there's still a lot of things to accomplish. And it begins on Saturday. So I'll go Oklahoma.
If Gary Patterson were still at TCU, I'd maybe take them to cover, but I think Oklahoma's going to beat them pretty good. TCU, sometimes when you make coaching hires and you are a little different than the rest of the teams in your league, and your league is kind of one way, and then you make a hire that makes you the same, it doesn't work out too well. Ask Texas about it, and I don't think it's going to work out too well for Sonny Dykes in TCU. I'm going to take Oklahoma to bounce back and cover the spread, even though TCU is undefeated.
All right. Let's go to the ESPN game day game and go to Clemson. JC, you mentioned the potential weather concerns for that game, and it may fall in line for the Tigers' strengths in that one. The Tigers 6.5-point home favorites against the NC State Wolfpack. Big ACC matchup this week.
Clemson's going to win the game, but it's going to be like that rainy game in 2015 when Dabo said, bring your own guts or whatever it is. Bring your own guts. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
They beat Notre Dame by 2 in a monsoon. That's the weekend Columbia was flooded, by the way. I think State's going to scare the dog do out of them like they do from time to time. But special teams will once again haunt the Wolfpack in Death Valley. Missed field goal at the end. Clemson wins. NC State covers.
What is the line again, Michael?
6.5. Clemson favored 6.5.
This is what I want to see, the real Devin Leary. You're talking about a guy who's thrown for over 5,000 yards. You're talking about a guy that NFL scouts seem to be excited about. But there's been a couple times, I'm not sitting here and watching 3.5 hours of NC State football every week, but there's been a couple times where I've caught him this year where I haven't been overwhelmed. If you're going to make a name for yourself, this is the game to do it. However, I'm taking Clemson.
That's not bad. You're probably right, Mike. I give up, man. I just
well, I mean, who knows? I don't know right now what either one of these teams is truly made of.
Yeah.
I know Clemson's better, but that doesn't mean you win the game. We see that in college football every week. The most talented team doesn't always win.
Well, State's usually played them pretty competitively.
Yeah.
They haven't always
had their
won,
chances.
but they've played competitively. So we'll see. This is a big game for NC State. They snapped the streak against them last year at Clemson, and Clemson wants revenge. So we'll see if they get it. Some of those DBs that were out for Clemson last week, I think, are expected to be back too. Wet field, though, if that is the case, that could neutralize that, because obviously that favors the offense because they know where they're going. So we'll see.
Let it be shown, this is the first time during the Pick 5 segment that both of you that you've chosen two different winners. You've differed on one game only throughout this series. So this is the first time that you both differ on two.
There we go. Okay.
So we don't share the same brain, do we?
Okay.
All right, guys.
We'll probably split.
Last one, we're going to stay in the ACC, and because I'm a big old softy and you guys are both woefully under 500, I'm gonna lob you a big 12-foot softball to smash out of the park. The Pitt Panthers are hosting Georgia Tech, who recently lost their coach. The Panthers are 23.5-point home favorites against the stumbling wreck in Georgia Tech.
All right. First off, there is no softball when you're going ATS against the spread against the boys in Vegas who set the line. Secondly, you know what? By golly.
Don't do it.
Heck of an engineer. Give me Georgia Tech. Yeah, this is a get off the mat. We deserve some respect. We're playing for pride. We're playing for the ghost of Bobby Dodd. We're playing for Joe Hamilton. We're playing for the boys that beat Cumberland 222-0. We're playing for engineers all over the world. We're playing for a cover, and I'll take the Georgia Tech Ramblin' Wreck.
I think it's the wrong team to try to cover against. If it were North Carolina or NC State or Virginia Tech or one of those teams that routinely disappoints people, Miami even, I'd probably follow your line of thinking. Pitt's too well coached. I think Georgia Tech's going to probably score some. But
I don't know if Pitt is well enough coached, though. They have backup kickers going rogue and doing onside kicks.
Narduzzi's had a colorful experience. He got onto ESPN at the beginning of the year about the crowd, and went off on his kicker. And Pitt football is kind of interesting this season. But I just think Pitt's too good as far as just how well coached they are and how good they are. And Tech, Brent Key is a good guy. He loves Georgia Tech. He's an alum. But that's a tough situation. So I don't totally disagree with Mike, because I thought they played pretty well against UCF, but it's just been a rough week, and I think Pitt's just the wrong team to be going to play.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for our pick 5. Gentlemen, Godspeed and best of luck to you to see if we can get you right and get you closer to 500.
God knows we need it. Hey, you mentioned UCF from UCF Night 94, a little around the AAC. UCF now 3-1 after the win against Georgia Tech. They'll take on SMU. Tulane was a great story. They were 3-0, and then they lose to Southern Miss. They've got a road game at Houston. Cincinnati is at Tulsa. It's kind of easy to forget about Cincinnati because they lost to Arkansas, but that was a competitive game. Tulsa played tough against Ole Miss. That was only 35-27 Rebels. That's the conference opener for both those two teams. ECU 2-2 at USF 1-3. Temple 2-2 at Memphis 3-1. Seems like Memphis is 3-1 every year. And then the only non-con game of the American, Navy. Remember, I was talking about what's happened to Navy. Coach Ann, I'm a big fan of his. They're 1-2. They're taking on Air Force in the Commander-in-Chief Trophy. Who's going to obtain it this year? Navy 1-2, Air Force 3-1, and making a lot of noise with their head coach. So there you have it.
It's a big game for USF, man. After the and Navy actually got a good win over East Carolina, but I mean, after almost beating Florida, Jeff Scott, I think, is now 1-21 against Power 5 or FBS competition.
They got blown out by Louisville.
They're not the most patient group down there either. I have some friends on that coaching staff, so I hope they're going to be okay. But that Louisville game is not good. This is an important game for Jeff Scott, but they're probably not even going to play it, Mike, because it's in Tampa.
Well, yeah. I thought, did I read that game is going to be played in Boca?
Yep.
Yeah, so they're playing at the mean streets of Boca Raton on the opposite coast where FAU plays its home games.
Oh, interesting connection there. Jake Bentley, who is Bobby Bentley's son, who played quarterback at South Carolina, and Bobby's on staff at USF. I wonder if when he called up old Jake and he talked to Willie Taggart and said, "Hey, can we use your stadium?"
Yeah,
that's interesting. But yeah, that stadium in Boca is pretty nice. I like it.
It's not bad. It's not bad. And to put a cap on USF, what has to chap USF Nation is that it wasn't that long ago they were top 10 under Coach Levitt and they were the talk of the town, and quite frankly, UCF had a rough patch. And USF was winning the battle of I-4, right? Like it was they had won that collision in terms of who gets to move ahead of the other. And, when conferences do realign, USF looked like the one that'd be better shape for the Big 12, not UCF. And what's happened since is UCF has gone through a downward spiral and UCF has had sustained success, and now they're going to be in the Big 12 next year. So I would imagine it's been a little bit difficult for USF fans to look at that and say, what just happened? We had everything right in our own hands.
I don't think they didn't give Skip Holtz enough time. They wrote out the Willie Taggart thing and then did not give Charlie Strong enough time. He has one bad year and he's gone. And then Jeff Scott comes in during a pandemic situation in the portal, and there's all this attrition. I don't think they're going to give him that much time. So they're kind of like the new Tennessee. And you're right. UCF's success does not help them one bit.
Maybe they could bring in champions of life to take over that job. maybe he can get them right.
He's fine at Arkansas State. And Jonesboro, Arkansas is pleasant spot for good old Butch Jones.
That's God's country right there. I'll tell you what, if I'm not even going to go there, but I'll just tell you that the best pair of jeans on the planet is courtesy of Blue Delta. We want to thank our friends over there in Oxford, Mississippi. And really, they're in Oxford, but it seems like they're always on the road, fitting people and coaches and players and singers and businessmen and regular folks like the three of us. Blue Delta, BlueDeltaJeans.com. I know you've heard this before. It's like everybody's claiming they've got the best of this, the best of that. I can tell you firsthand, a custom pair of jeans from Blue Delta is a difference maker. It's a game changer, as they say. So check them out. If you don't even have to go to the store to get fit, they've got kind of a kit, or if you will, online, a virtual fitting room, go to bluedeltajeans.com. Gentlemen, it's been fun as always. Looking forward to it next week, and best wishes to everybody in all seriousness with the weather coming. Hopefully everybody stays safe, particularly in the state of Florida, where it's going to be hitting the most. And then before it goes north, and you've already seen some other games changing. Of course, South Carolina and South Carolina State, they're going to be playing on a Thursday. I believe there's another game that's going to be moving to a Sunday. So you got a lot of things at play. Let's just hope the damage is minimal by the time we talk to everybody next Tuesday. So that'll do it for us. For JC, Michael, this is Mike saying so long. Thanks again for tuning in to JC and Morgan.